must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex.
What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got an awesome show. I'm super excited to have Abraham Bolden here. He was the first African-American Secret Service agent assigned to a presidential detail. He has an amazing story about being framed, getting locked up. I mean, it sounds like something like you would see in a Denzel movie, but it's real life. And it happened to this amazing guy who now is coming out and telling the story. And there's also a petition out to clear his record. And so we'll get right into it. Thanks, Abraham, for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Ricky.
Hey, I appreciate your time. And so for the listeners who aren't familiar with your story, you grew up in Illinois. You wanted to be a police officer. What ended up wanting you to take that route into being? I think you ended up being a detective. Then you ended up working for the state police, I believe.
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, when I grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois, I had always wanted to be in the law. But my father couldn't support me going to college and becoming a lawyer because there were so many of us in the college at the same time. I had 5 brothers and sisters. Now, I grew up in this small town, and one of my chief icons, you might call him, was Detective Lucius Hogan, and another Sheriff Leo Gooden. And we would talk oftentimes and talk about the different crime problems that were happening in the small city. And I, at that time, wanted to make some contribution to the American people in solving those problems. So I set out to become a policeman, you might say, but I took a devious route in that I became a very, very good musician. And in the process of playing in the Lincoln High School band, I happened to meet a young man who became a very famous trumpet player, and his name was Miles Davis.
Oh, wow.
And that's, yes. And that sort of spurred me on in the music field for a while. I became quite a musician, playing with several dance bands around East St. Louis, Illinois. Now, I received 2 scholarships, one to Milton University and the other one to Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. So I went to Lincoln University. After I graduated, I had to make a decision. I had a teaching job in the Haytime, Missouri, offered to me, a band director's job, and I also had a Pinkerton job that was open at the same time, the very exact same time. So I had to make a decision on what I really wanted to do, and I chose to go into law enforcement. So when I first went to Pinkerton National Detective Agency, they didn't have any black investigators at that time. And I went over to St. Louis, Missouri, 705 Olive Street, and made application, and I became the first African-American Pinkerton detective in the United States. So after that, I became an Illinois State Policeman, which I spent 4 years as the Illinois State Policeman. Now, in doing that time as an Illinois State Policeman, I had an occasion where Senator Kennedy was coming to Peoria, Illinois, where I was stationed. And as a state troop, I was stationed at Peoria Airport, directing traffic out there, and I happened to see this young senator who promised so much to the American people, and who I became to idolize as a very great person who would make the contribution and would keep his word to the American people. And as he passed by me in Peoria, Illinois, I was stationed right in the center of the street, and I had to stop the traffic as his big white Lincoln went by, and he was sitting on the back of the convertible cover. And I waved and he waved, and never stopping to think that someday that I would shake hands with him. Well, from that, I began to develop an interest in becoming a Secret Service agent. So when I had an opportunity in 1960 to work with one of the Secret Service agents, Special Agent in Charge Backstrom, I asked the Special Agent in Charge whether or not they had any Negro agents in the United States Secret Service. He could not specifically say it, but he told me that if I was interested to make an application, he would bring me to Springfield, give me a test and everything, take the civil service test and see how it came out. So that's what I did. And in October of 1960, October the 30th of 1960, I became a Secret Service agent and was stationed in Chicago. Now, one of the primary duties of the United States Secret Service is the protection of the President of the United States. In fact, that's one of the chief duties of the United States Secret Service, delegated to them by a congressional act. Now, the president won Cook County here in Chicago by some 8,000 votes, and that assured that President Kennedy would be elected over President Nixon. That was the margin of victory here in Cook County that gave President Kennedy the electoral votes that he needed. Now, out of those 8,000 votes, I'll just tell you, there were probably 7,999 that were voted from the graveyard, because that's what they did in Chicago.
There's a saying about, they say in Illinois you have to get some votes from the graveyard to win, right? Wasn't there a saying like that?
They said vote early and vote often.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that was the motto. So President Kennedy on April 28th of 1961 was coming to Chicago to thank Mayor Dealey for the victory here in Cook County. Now, being a Secret Service agent, a young Secret Service agent, being stationed in Chicago, I was detailed to help protect the president once they came into the Chicago area. First, they put me at McCormick Place, near the convention hall, near the banquet hall, where the president was going to enter into the door, his first entranceway. But then something happened, and I was called into the office and told that they had changed my position to a washroom, which was located down in the basement of McCormick Place and set out to be used by the President of the United States. Now, that to me was sort of disappointing, because I really wanted to see the president standing by the door of the banquet hall. Was a very, very good position. That position was given to Chicago policemen, and they put me, as I say, standing guard in front of a washroom on the lower level of McCormick Place. Well, as fate would have it, when the motorcade arrived at 8:30 p.m., I heard a rustling upstairs, and the photographers were taking pictures, and the band struck up "Here Comes the President," and you could just hear all kind of clapping and things going on. And my goodness, I really wanted to see the president, but I felt that in that position that they had given me, it was about slim to none that I would see the president in person. But as the fates gave me grace, I looked up the steps, and the photographers were flashing pictures of the President Kennedy coming down the steps. The first thing that he wanted to do when he arrived at McCormick Place was use the washroom, and that's where I was. So
It worked out.
yeah. So this thing here was very unnatural in a way. So now the president walked down the steps. He was accompanied by all of the big shot politicians in Chicago. Yeah, they were trying to jockeying for position, and congressmen and senators, they all wanted to be close to the president, you could imagine, and they all came down the steps. The president stopped right in front of me and asked me, he said, "Are you a Secret Service agent, or you one of Mayor Daley's finest?" I said, "I'm a Secret Service agent, Mr. President." I was shocked. And he extended his hands, we shook hands, and one of the other agents said, his name is Abraham Bolden, he's stationed here in Chicago. The president looked me in the eye and he smiled. I never will forget that smile, because when the president smiled, his whole face smiled. It was not a toothy smile, it was just everything about him glowed and smiled like he was sincerely glad to see me. And I sure was glad to see him too. And as we were shaking hands, he asked me, "Mr. Bolden," he says, "has there ever been a Negro on the White House detail in Washington, D.C.?" And I told him, "Not to my knowledge, Mr. President." And as I said in my book, The Echo from Dealey Plaza, he said, "Would you like to be the first?" And I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. President." Oh, I was visibly shaken by that question. And the president answered, said that, "I'll be looking forward to seeing you in Washington, D.C."
Wow.
And that was really something, and I just couldn't believe it. So after the event was over, I couldn't wait until I get home to tell my wife that I had met this wonderful president of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And when I told her, she was standing in the kitchen, I said, I shook hands with the president, and he invited me to come to Washington, D.C. to become the first Negro on the Secret Service detail. My wife looked at me and said, "You lying?" I said, "No, I'm not." She couldn't believe it herself. And so on on June the 6th of 1961, I got the message to report to Washington, D.C., which I did. And upon that time, I became the first African-American appointed to the United States Secret Service detail protecting the president in Washington, D.C. I became a historical figure, and I really appreciated the opportunity. I never suspected that I would be a man of history. All I wanted to do was really contribute to the American people and to solve some of the crime problems that we were having. But to become an iconic figure in history was far beyond what I had supposed that I would accomplish. Now, while I was on the White House detail, I noticed some things that were going on that were very dangerous so far as the protection of the life of the president was concerned. Now, I noticed that the agents, many of them were drinking on duty. And when we went to Hyannisport, Massachusetts, the president went to Hyannisport, Massachusetts on about July the 2nd of 1961, I noticed that they were reporting from work for work drunk, and that they were bringing whores into the room where we were living, and they were partying and over into the late morning, and then getting up and going to work. Some of them were not fit to protect the president because their physical condition and mental condition was not correct, because they were lack of sleep. There was just the smell of alcohol. As a matter of fact, some were so addicted to this alcohol that they had a little bottle in a bag that they carried. And I was concerned about this. Also, another concern of mine was the fact is how they referred to the president. Many of the agents that were on the detail, and that were about 15 of us on each shift, they disliked the president. They disliked the president because of his stand for civil rights. They disliked him because he was a Catholic. They disliked him because of his relation that he had with the might say Latinos and the Black Americans during that period of time. Now, if you recall, Ricky, the 1960s, no, you won't recall it, but you probably read about it. No, you don't recall. But the 1960s was a heck of a time for all Americans. We were in the midst of freedom rides down in the South. There were lynchings and there were lots of racial strife all the way across America. And in the midst of all of this, as I said, I became the first African-American Secret Service agent. And I had an opportunity to hear the opinion of many of the agents who were charged with the protection of the President of the United States. And the way that I looked at it was, regardless of how you personally felt about the President of the United States, we had a constitutional obligation to protect him no matter how we felt. Now, it was my own opinion that you probably don't remember Governor Farbers either, but if Governor Farbers had been elected President of the United States and he was a stunt segregationist, just like Governor Wallace, I would have had the same attitude of protecting them as I did for President Kennedy, because that was the duty, that was my obligation. But some of the Secret Service agents protecting Kennedy didn't seem to have that attitude. Now, what really disturbed me was a conversation that I heard the agents discussing when we were in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. They were sitting around, and one of the shift leaders, Harvey Henderson, was saying that if someone that took a shot at the president, he wouldn't respond. He would let it happen. He would let the president be assassinated. And he was encouraging others of the detail to do the same thing. So I thought this was absolutely horrendous. Here we have an agent of the United States government saying that he would not do his job intentionally if that the president was in danger. And that's what we were there for. We were the first line of defense against anyone who would want to override our Constitution and change our leadership by violence. And that's why we were there, to assure that this doesn't happen. So on July the 5th, as we were on the way back to Washington, D.C. after the 4th of July holiday, I was on a helicopter with the chief of the Secret Service, who was James Rowley at that time. And I told Chief Rowley that there was something I wanted to discuss with him. Well, before we could engage in a conversation, the president himself aboarded the helicopter, and we had to abort the conversation that I was trying to bring forth to Chief Rowley. Now, as we sailed along in Air Force One after getting off of the helicopter at Otis Air Force Base, I then tried to broach the conversation again to Chief Rowley concerning the conduct of the Secret Service agents around the president. Chief Rowley said that he didn't have time to talk about it, so I had no other alternative than to go over Chief Rowley's head direct into the chief of the United States Secret Service. See, Chief Rowley was the chief of the United Secret Service White House detail, but Chief Bauman, U.E. Bauman, was the chief of the entire Secret Service. So you had two divisional chiefs there. Now, actually, Chief Bauman was superior to Chief Rowley, because Chief Bauman was the one who appointed Chief Rowley in charge of the detail. As a result, I decided to go right into Chief Bauman and explain what I had seen and what I had heard, and to warn him that the president's life was in jeopardy because of the attitude of some of the agents surrounding the president. He promised me, Chief Bauman promised me, that he would look into it. So I asked to be separated from the detail, and on July the 6th of 1961, I came back to Chicago. Now, when Inspector Kelly came to Chicago, and this was in 1963, he did an interview with me in which I brought out all of the details which I had given to Chief Rowley, which I had given to Chief Barman, which I had given to all of my supervisors in the Chicago area. I told Chief Kelly, who was an inspector with the Secret Service, that the president's life was in danger. In the meantime, in 1963, we were getting all sorts of threats against the life of the President of the United States. We had intercepted a conversation between, you might say, a right-wing person whose last name was Miltier, who had engaged in a conversation with one of our informants. And Miltier had expressed the method in which that they wanted to assassinate President Kennedy. Now, the informant was working for the Secret Service, and he asked Miltier, just how are we going to kill the president? Now, we had recordings of this conversation. And Miltier answered that they were going to kill the president by using a high-powered rifle with a telescope from a tall building. And that's it. And they said, well, what about the Secret Service? Miltier said that the more Secret Service, the better. He says that we've got everything taken care of, we have everything taken care of, and we got a patsy all set up in order to take the fall when the president is assassinated. So we came to Chicago, and we were in a discussion where we got a telephone call from the FBI, and this was in March of 1963. There was a call that came from the FBI which said that the president was in danger of being assassinated. Now, nothing occurred during that March of 1963 because a person called into the Chicago office of the Secret Service and talked with Mr. Martineau, and we were in a meeting in the Secret Service office. Mr. Martineau said that some nut named Lee had called the Chicago office and said the president was going to be assassinated. Now, that made the Secret Service reschedule how the president was going to come in. Instead of using the motorcade, the president came by helicopter and landed at Meigs Field, which was close to the hotel where he was going to be in. Now, in November of 1963, we had another serious threat. We had an informant who was allied with a Cuban organization called the DRE. We had an informant inside that organization. And a person, a Cuban named Echeverria, told one of our informants that the president was about to be assassinated. Now, this was in late October or early November in 1963. And Echeverria said that they had gotten enough money to carry it out, and that the reason that the president was going to be assassinated because of the Bay of Pigs thing, that they wanted to go back into Cuba, and they felt that President Johnson would be better inclined to go back into Cuba and take it back from the Castro regime. Then on November the 2nd, November the 1st of 1963, just 22 days before the president was assassinated, 4 men rented a room along the route in which the president was to take from O'Hare Airport all the way into Chicago. There were 4 Cubans who came, and there were rifles that were discovered in their rooms. One of them's name was a Rodriguez, as I remember, Gonzalez and a Rodriguez, which are common Cuban names, which led me to believe that they could have been aliases. But a landlady discovered those weapons laying on a bed, covered up, I guess, with sheets when she went to make up the bed, and also the route that the president was supposed to take encircled on that newspaper report. And so now we put the Secret Service put a surveillance on this room, and they talked to the landlady, and it was indeed discovered that these persons did in fact possess those rifles. But what happened was this: the Secret Service blew the investigation, and the president had to cancel his trip to Chicago to the, I think it was the Army football game here at Soldier Field. He canceled that because the Secret Service in Chicago blew the investigation and lost contact and lost the trail of all but one of the suspects that was involved. And this suspect who was involved that was caught was an ex-Marine named Arthur Vallee. And we sincerely believe that Vallee had been also involved in this scheme to assassinate the president in Chicago. In the back of Vallee's car was found a rifle, telescopic sights, he had explosives, and he had other different devices that would tend to distract one from an event that was about to happen or participate in it himself. He was arrested. 22 days later, the president was indeed assassinated in Dallas, Texas. And he was assassinated using the same method that Miltier had said, from a tall building using a telescopic sight. And not only that, there was a fall guy in the picture who turned out to be Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, as I said, Ricky, we had all of this information before the president went to Dallas, Texas. And there was really a laxity in the administration of the Secret Service to let the president of the American people walk into a sure death trap. And that's what that was, set up down there in Dallas, having all of the information to remove the hard top and let the president ride in an open automobile, knowing that we had three serious threats to assassinate him, and knowing that he was going into hostile territory when he visited Dallas. So after the president was assassinated, strange things have happened within the Secret Service. They began to redictate reports. They began to destroy investigative reports that we had in reference to the assassination of the president. All of the reports that related to the Echeverria case were packed up, sent to Washington, D.C., to the chief's office. They were taken off the plane by Deputy Chief P.J. Paterni and turned over to the chief of the Secret Service, who was then James Rowley. Now, the reason for that was that Mr. Martineau falsely redictated a report in which Echeverria had said that the president would be assassinated soon, and he redictated the report to say that the assassination attempt that Echeverria referred to was against President Johnson. So that removed this conversation from the investigation of the Warren Commission. Now, by me knowing this, Ricky, and having been brought up by mother and father to respect the Constitution, the laws of the United States, I felt an obligation after the Warren Commission was appointed by Johnson in 1965 that the Warren Commission should have all of the facts that the Secret Service had concerning any threats against the President of the United States. And by me watching within the newspaper reports of who was appearing before the Warren Commission and what they were saying, and the conclusions that some of the witnesses were coming to, and the fact that the Secret Service was covering up quite a bit of evidence, I felt that someone had to take on the responsibility to make sure that the Warren Commission knew all of the facts related to what I knew about the assassination of the President of the United States. Now, shortly after the President was assassinated, there was no question about the fact that some of the agents who were in the follow-up car behind the president made the statement that the shots that killed the president came from the grassy knoll. And there are other agents who wrote reports that said that the president was shot from a building, the Deltex building. Now, these reports were destroyed, or they were taken and sent in to the chief, and they made these reports, backdated reports and destroyed reports, and it was just unbelievable what they were doing. Now, I told the special agent in charge that someone needed to go to the Warren Commission and get this straightened out. And he told me to mind my own business, but I couldn't mind my own business because, number one, this was the President of the United States of America. We had elected him as our leader. And I felt that someone had to take the responsibility and the chance to bring everything forward to the Warren Commission. When I went to Washington, D.C. to attend the Secret Service School on May the 17th of 1964, I was brought back to Chicago after having tried to contact J. Lee Rankin, who was one of the counsels of the Warren Commission. I tried to call him through the White House switchboard. Apparently, they were suspicious that that's what I would do. So they came to me the next day, told me I lied, that they needed me back in Chicago because they had just broken a counterfeiting case in Villa Park, Illinois, and that they needed me in order to help seal up the case because I was one of the best investigators here in Chicago. Now, they brought me to Chicago and kept me for 24 hours without giving me anything to eat. It was 95 degrees outside, and this was on May 17th, May 18th of 1964. They kept me until the next day. At midnight, they told me that they were going to charge me with the commission of a crime of soliciting a bribe. Now, the people that they used in order to level this charge were criminals. I had arrested one of those criminals twice. This would have been his third conviction, and he was on his way to the penitentiary for the rest of his life. The second guy was a guy named Joseph Spagnoli. Now, these both were counterfeiters. They were in the same business, and I believe that they had an association. But I was forced to go and talk with Frank Jones concerning a case that I had pending against Frank Jones. Mr. Martin told me to go and talk with Frank Jones concerning a telephone call that Frank Jones made to the Secret Service office, offering that he would give more information concerning his operation for which I had arrested him. Now, that's neither here nor there. They charged me with attempting to solicit a bribe. I went to trial. During the deliberation of the jury in the first trial, the judge called the jury out of the jury room, instructed them that in his opinion, the evidence confirmed the verdict of guilty against the accused, and then told the jury, now retire and consider what I just told you. In other words, he became a 13th juror.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes, he became a 13th juror. Now, after he had gone so far astray from the Constitution of the United States, we asked for another judge. He refused, and he listened to a second trial. Now, during the second trial, the jury was deliberating. After the first trial ended in a hung jury. The second trial, the jury was deliberating. At 5:30, at 5:30 p.m. on August 11th of 1964. The judge called my attorney into the courtroom along with the assistant state's attorney and said, I'm going to release the jury and they're going to stop deliberating until tomorrow morning. We'll be back here at 9 o'clock. So the assistant state's attorney, Arthur Don, took everybody out of the courtroom, took me, my attorney, all of the spectators out of the courtroom, took us downstairs, put us out of the court building, and chained the door locked. But inside of the court was the jury, Secret Service agents, the judge, and the recorder, courtroom recorder, and a couple of FBI agents. On my way home on that same night, I'm coming down the expressway, and WBBM has a flash report that the jury in the Bolden trial had just reached a decision, and it would be announced the next morning on August the 12th. So the judge lied. He did not release the jury. He did not have them to wait until 9 o'clock on August the 12th in order to begin deliberation. Now, in subpoenaing all of the transcripts of the trial, everything is there except the judge's communication with the jury. No jury instructions are included in the transcripts of the last trial. Everything concerning the jury has been sanitized from the transcripts. But we appeal. On January the 20th of 1965, Joseph Spagnoli, who was one of the main witnesses against me in my trial, admitted in his own trial that he committed perjury in my trial, and that the government attorney had told him what to say and had solicited perjury in my trial, because later I found out the reason was they said that I was a uppity nigger. That's what they called me. So now, when we went to the Court of Appeals, of course, the three-judge panel of the Court of Appeals, when this issue came up, said that they wanted to get to the bottom of it, whether or not the federal government had solicited perjury in a federal criminal trial. So they called the attorney, the accused attorney, Richard Seitz, assistant attorney Richard Seitz. And the chief judge asked him point blank, did you solicit perjury in the Bolden trial? Seitz took the Fifth Amendment. He says, Your Honor, I refuse to answer on the basis that my answer may tend to incriminate me. But the Court of Appeals affirmed the conviction, even though we had a government official accused of soliciting perjured testimony against another defendant in a federal criminal trial, which is unheard of. Now, after that, we took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. We denied certiorari. And I was in prison on June the 26th of 1966. And for a period of 3 years and 3 months. Now, during that incarceration period, and sometimes I get a little bit emotional because it's very difficult to talk about. I knew that I was in deep trouble because they had gone so far as to convict me of a felony. And I knew that the next step in reading how dictatorial governments act, and that's what I was facing at that particular time. I was facing a fascist government, and not the government that I had really thought existed. I knew that somewhere along the line they would attempt to declare me incompetent. I knew that. I discussed this with my attorney. I knew that I had to be very careful, because if they were succeeded at that, then they could have held me for the rest of my life, without any hearing or anything. Now, excuse the telephone.
Okay.
Yeah.
They never found the file that they accused you of selling too, right?
No, they never could. The file that I was accused of trying to sell was given to me and was nothing but a probation file. There was nothing super secret about it or anything like that. It was a file that I knew that all that one of the attorneys had to do was ask for it, and they could have just got the whole thing. It was a probation file. There was nothing secret about it. But anyway, they gave me a copy of it and told me when I finished to give it to another agent, which I did. The other agent testified that he lost the file and didn't even look for it. That was his testimony, because he knew he didn't have it. Well, when they asked me about it, I went to the other agent, Agent Cross, and asked him what happened to the file they asked me about. He said, I don't know. But yet they accused me of trying to sell this file, which I did not have. Now, when I went to Springfield, Missouri, after having been incarcerated for approximately 1 year, I went to the Springfield Medical Center, and they placed me in a camp. Now, there are 4 divisions of institutions in Springfield, Missouri Medical Center. They have a camp there that take care of the grounds and yards and do the cooking and work in the kitchen. They also have a hospital for those persons who have some illness like diabetes or having an operation or whatever. And then they have the psychiatric ward there where the most dangerous of prisoners are kept, and that's called 2-1 East. They call it the tomb in 2-1 East. Then they have the transitory division of that institution, which was like a terminal for prisoners who were being transferred across the United States, because Springfield, Missouri is sort of centrally located. It was sort of a roundhouse and a terminal point where all different kind of prisoners going from east to west or west to east would stop over until the U.S. Marshals would continue the journey. So on July the 6th of 1967, I was assigned to the camp, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 guards came to my bunk in the camp, told me to follow them. So I went to put on my shoes and things. They said, just put your shoes on and just come like you are, which I had on prison issued pajamas. So we walked through a dark hallway. It seemed like forever, until we came to 2-1 East. We came to this big steel door. And I had visions of this steel door when I was a young man, just 12 years old. Something by divine providence had already told me that during my lifetime I would be behind this thick steel door, as I bring out in my book that I go from Dealey Plaza. I had a foresight of this. And when I saw that steel door, I knew that that premonition that I had indeed came true. I could hear behind this big door as they swung it open, there were inmates, psychotic inmates, screaming to the top of their voice, cursing to the top of their voice. This is 3 o'clock in the morning. Some of them were throwing feces against the window. There were no question about it, insane inmates. That's where they took me. They took me into one of these, put me in a cell, took all of my clothes, my shoes, everything. And the only thing in there was a little washroom off to the left and a bed, a bunk bed. And the next morning at about 8:30, 4 guards showed up and said, it's medication time. I told the guards, I'm not taking medication. They said, you are now. So they proceeded to force me to take the psychotropic drug, which my system was not, could not deal with. It knocked me out, and I've had ringing in my left ear since that time. It's been ringing for over 50 years now, about 50 years. And I've gone to doctor after doctor, and they can't cure that ringing that was caused by this fall after they gave me this 175 grams of what they call Elvil. And I know that they had an intention of trying to declare me insane. But they failed at that when the chief of the classification and parole, Mr. Julius Nichols, who was the instigator in carrying out orders from apparently somebody higher up than he, was the one who had to sign the transition papers, moving me from the prison camp into the psychiatric institute for treatment. Now, mind you that they went through all of this without going through court, as the outline of the Federal Bureau of Prisons demanded at that time. They were supposed to get a court order in order to transfer me into psychiatric treatment. They did not do this. As a matter of fact, they did transfer me on the sly and kept me for a period of 30 days, forcing me to take these psychiatric drugs. But as I say in my book, The Echo from Dealey Plaza, I devised a plan where I could defeat these drugs, and I came out okay. But it was an ordeal that I considered as torture, and I still today consider as torture. Now, what happened to me, and we're trying to get petitions together to get the record expunged and everything, but a federal judge in 1995, when I, acting as a pro se attorney, I took the case back to the district courts, which I appealed all the way to the Supreme Court myself. I wrote the writs and everything. The judge denied to expunge my record based upon this. He said that I had failed to show that my conviction had, how did he put it? Had hurt me. In other words, I couldn't prove that having been convicted of a crime gave me a legal disability. That's what he said. There was no legal disability. In other words, we put you through this, you came out okay, so what are you complaining about?
Wow.
That's what. Wow. Isn't that something? So now we're still, I'll be 80 years old next month, thanks be to God. And I'm just hoping that President Obama will do something to alleviate some of the pain and strife that I've been through and my family has been through during all of these years that I have been falsely accused and convicted of a crime against the United States government and the American people.
Yeah, your record should definitely be clean. This is a amazing story, and anybody listening, you can go to Abraham Bolden's website and you can find the petition there. And I'll also put it underneath the show descriptions. I'll put a link to the petition, and I think it's important for people to get this information out there, and it's an amazing story. And like you said, it was torture, because the thing is that, just because you don't have any maybe physical anything visually you can see, obviously, it had some psychological effects on you. I mean, anytime somebody's locked up like that and given drugs, I mean, there's gonna have some, I'm sure, have some psychological effects on you, and you'll never get that time that you were locked up back either. You'll never get that part of your life back. So I mean, it's absolutely, people should go out there, get this petition, and people should be more aware of this too, because now with just recently the CIA, the torture report, and all this stuff, I mean, people should be aware that this stuff happens, and there's a lot of stuff that happens behind closed doors, and we should be aware of it. And I guess I mean, all this money goes into a black budget that goes into these torturing at Gitmo and this and that. And when you hear stories like this, it reminds us that this stuff really does happen. It's not just fiction. It's not just a movie. And you went through some crazy times. And what's your opinion on like the current events? Obviously, being seeing so much of the transitions from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to the 90s. Well, what's your opinion on what's going on today with like Ferguson and the torture report? Do you think that things are getting better, or things are only getting worse, or what's your opinion on the state of America now?
They are positively getting worse, because now things have gone, the racists have gone deeper undercover now. Instead of them standing there with sticks and stones, the racists now have police uniforms. They're having police uniforms. And the reason that so many young black men are being killed, are being shot down defenseless, is not because there are so many black criminals, but these racists are actually killing Obama, because they hate the fact that a black man has become the president of the United States, and they have transferred this arrogance and hate that they have for him, and they have generalized it into a whole nation of people. That's what they have done. And they are saying in so many words that you have the White House, but we have the power, you see. And that they're trying to make a statement. Things are much worse, and they're not going to get better, because you have a new Negro, a new African American now, who is being groomed and willing to fight for their freedom. You didn't have that in the 60s. We had what was called the nonviolent march. Well, my people are sick of being nonviolent. And you're going to have an explosion in the United States of America that America, the people of America, cannot imagine, because we're just tired of being second-class citizens, shot down in the street, miseducated, undereducated, and it just seems like the only way out is war and death. It seems the only way out now.
Well, it's being a police officer yourself, you see you see both sides, and being African American, who I mean, obviously in the 60s there were was it when I can't remember if it was when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, or when John Kennedy was assassinated, but I remember just huge riots in the streets, and people were really angry and outraged, and that could happen today. I think we look at historical events like the time of Martin Luther King and stuff like that, and we look at those rallies and those protests, and we just think, oh, that can't happen today, but it is happening today, and people are angry. And I think that even though we've progressed, I guess on the surface we look like, okay, racism has gotten better because you grew up in a time where you had politicians that were in the Ku Klux Klan, and you had people were very forward with their racism and stuff like that. So on the surface, things look like they've gotten better. But I think that you look at the same African Americans and whites do the same amount of drugs at the same rate, but African Americans get locked up for the same convictions a lot more often. You look at our prisons, the population is still the majority Caucasian, but yet our prisons are full of minorities. So you look at, like, there's still, even though slavery and all that stuff is behind us, we like to think that that was the past and we've progressed. We've progressed to some sense, but I still think that there's still racism in different ways. From you look at, like I said, you look at crack and cocaine. Perfect example how same drug, but crack would you had a bigger sentence than you did if you did cocaine. Why? Because look at usually the customers who do those drugs, and so from the outside looking in, it looked like they were trying to pick on minorities. And do you think there's any truth to that?
Yes, I know that there's truth to it. I know, because I experience it right now every day in Chicago. I see the difference how the police pull over young black men, make them get out of the car, they pull their pants down right in the street, have them to drop their pants right in the street in front of the entire public. And they try to provoke these young men into activity which will get them a charge of resisting arrest or hitting an officer. This happens all the time here in Chicago. And I saw, you might say, reflections of it even in the Secret Service. When I was a Secret Service agent, I was only called the N-word by members of the Secret Service. I had one of my supervisors, Harvey Henderson, when we were in Massachusetts, looked at me and told me, he says, "Hey, I want to tell you something." He said, "You a nigger, you were born a nigger, you're going to die a nigger, you'll never be anything else but a nigger." Now, he was a Secret Service supervisor, and that's what he told me to my face. Now you don't have the white robes. The white robes of the Ku Klux Klan have turned into blue uniforms. See? Instead of serving and protecting the people and the masses of people. And this goes for many white people too. Many of the poor whites are being mistreated just like the poor blacks. People don't realize that. But they don't serve and protect in the black neighborhoods. What they do is observe, and reject. That's what they do.
And
reject and suspect.
And I heard you in an interview talk about how you think that some of the hatred towards Kennedy was because of him, I guess being so friendly with the African American community, and obviously Robert Kennedy also, and that was some of the hatred you think that the Secret Service and maybe even possibly CIA agents and stuff like that, they had a dislike towards Kennedy because of his relationship with the African American community.
Yes, they did. Very definitely they did. That was one of the main sticking points, because I heard references throughout the Secret Service. Wherever that I went, I heard Kennedy referred to as a nigger lover. And it was just awful, some of the things that they were saying about him. Now, he wasn't a perfect man by any means, but he was the President of the United States. And we are not there as Secret Service agents to judge the morality of the President of the United States. We're there to protect his life and to make sure that we have an orderly transition in government. Now, what really disappoints me more than anything else is that we have agents who have made videos on YouTube condemning the conduct of the President of the United States. There are agents who are actually coming out talking about the women that the President had and Marilyn Monroe and all sort of different things. But we have yet to have the agents to tell us why they did not protect Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, what they did the night before the president was assassinated, how many of them were drunk. See, this is what the American people need to know. What did the Secret Service know and when did they know it? This is what we want to hear. We don't want to hear whether or not President Kennedy or Jacqueline Kennedy had 20 boyfriends or girlfriends. We're not interested in that. We want to know, was our Constitution protected? That's the main thing.
And looking back at the assassination, what do you think, or where do you think the kill shot came from? Do you think that it came from, because I've heard some theories on possibly it was somebody in the front seat. I've heard stories about, Lyndon Johnson putting his head down before the actual gunshot, and obviously there's a video online too that if people haven't seen it, it's pretty amazing. There's a lot of amazing videos online, but there's one of Secret Service agents getting off the car before the final turn, and and it looks like they shrugged their shoulders, like they don't know why they're being asked to get off the car, because on the back of the convertible there was these handles where the agents were supposed to stand on and stuff like that, and this little spot where they stand on the back and hold on to the trunk and stuff, and really there was no human shields on the last turn, and but there's one thing that has always seemed weird, how Mrs. Kennedy, how after getting shot, like you figured your first reaction would to be ducking and to try to get away from danger, but it was amazing after the first gunshots that nobody in the front sped up or anything, that the driver actually seemed like he slowed down, and the other thing that Mrs. Kennedy jumped onto the trunk, and some people say it was to grab pieces of his brain and stuff like that, but I also heard the theory that it was because the gunshot came from the front seat. It was possibly the Secret Service agent in the front. Where do you think there's any truth to any of those theories, or which theory do you think makes the most sense to you?
Well, I've looked at the films of the agent who was driving the car, and it appears that the shot might have been fired from the front seat, but I'm not convinced of that, because pictures can be doctored. I'm just not convinced of it, knowing the particular driver of the car and having personally met him. I'm not convinced of that. Now, the agents basically said, especially the one that was standing on the right side of the running board, is that he thought that the second and third shots came from his right side, which would have been the grassy knoll area. The first one he thought came from behind, and you can see him in the picture looking around behind. Now that agent is standing on the right side of the car, the passenger side of the car, the first agent standing there. You'll see him turn his head and look backwards. Now, then when the other shots are fired, the other agents are looking towards the grassy knoll. So I really believe that the president was caught in what they call a triangular pattern, which is taught by the CIA and other police organizations. It's a standard pattern of assassination. I believe that the Jail-Tex building, the school book depository, and the grassy knoll were all involved in a triangular situation that assassinated the president. Very well planned out. Because how could a right-winger like Miltier describe actually how the president would be assassinated, and then it turns out that that's exactly how he was assassinated. Even right down to the last thing, Oswald being a fall guy. And Miltier had said they had already set up a patsy. So this thing here, it seems to me that it was well organized, and they were following the president. They had well planned this thing for 3 different states. I think that they had followed him from Miami, Florida, to Chicago, and finally in Dallas, everything was set to go.
Well, you look at the head of the Warren Commission, Alan Dulles. He was fired after the Bay of Pigs by Kennedy, and then afterwards was put on the Warren Commission, which was, obviously insane if you ask me. The idea that you get fired and then the guy that fired you, you're asked to investigate his death. I mean, that to me was and Gerald Ford being on the Warren Commission, who eventually becomes president. And there's all the whole Warren Commission just seemed silly. Like there's tons of testimonies of people that were there that they either didn't care to listen to or ignored their testimony, or people who went to the police and they ignored them. And then obviously the magic bullet and a lot of, there's so much in this Kennedy assassination. And, just the fact that Jack Ruby, there's a video of Jack Ruby after he killed Oswald saying that people from the higher up were involved in this, and he couldn't talk because he was in Dallas. But if he left Dallas, he'd spill the beans, and he obviously seemed like he was trying to tell people that there was more to the story than Oswald, and it just seems coincidental that Oswald, who killed Kennedy, seemed when the media talked to him that he didn't know what was going on. He didn't even know what he was accused of. There's no actual eyewitness that saw him pull a trigger on the police officer that he shot near the theater, or to trigger when he that killed the president. It's all just he said, she said stuff, and there's no real hard evidence. And I'm not even sure if he was alive that he would even be, if he got a real trial, there'd be enough evidence to actually accuse him of it. And so I mean, there's just so many holes in the story. And and then Jack Ruby dies in prison. Some people believe that they gave him a shot for I forgot what it was, but eventually ended up giving him cancer and killed him. So it was just a lot of people who are part of this JFK assassination end up disappearing or having weird car accidents or weird deaths or suicides. And so I mean, it's obviously you've been through a lot of stuff, but I mean, I guess the good thing is that you're alive and able to tell the story.
Yes, that's right. But I would like to have my dignity restored because I committed no crime, and I did what I thought was best for the American people. I did not know at that time that the acting Attorney General Katzenbach had issued a memo to Bill Morris, which said in this memo dated, I believe it was the 26th of November, of 1963, which was shortly after the president was assassinated. The memo said that Oswald had to be found to be the lone assassin. Now, this is before the Warren Commission was appointed. So I didn't find that out until I would say about 20 years ago when the memo surfaced. But Katzenbach, who was the Attorney General, who had replaced Kennedy because of Robert Kennedy's brother's assassination, had said that, look, we got to find Oswald as a lone assassin. And that's what happened. Now, how do you investigate an assassination when you've already concluded that this was the guy? And so it was just a fraud on the American people, and American people deserve to know the truth about what happened in Dallas on November the 22nd of 1963. There's no question about it.
And looking back at Malcolm X's, the way he died and MLK died, do you think that this was also a strategy to kind of take out everybody who was rallying the people against?
Absolutely, yeah. See, now when these things were happening and the average person tried to tell the people of the United States that there were a conspiracy to eliminate these people, they wanted to put a nut tag on you. But you can see that the leadership was being, you might say, manipulated towards a certain end. And that manipulation of the leadership of this country was being led towards what we have today, towards that one world government, that new world order. Now, I don't think that the powers that be suspected that President Kennedy could be manipulated into any new world order, because the things that he was doing was severely against the New World Order. He was trying to unite instead of divide. He was trying to develop in other countries what we had here in America, so to speak, the freedom and justice and equality that we allegedly work you enjoy in America. And he was serious about it. They could not buy him because his father had all the money in the world, and the President Kennedy had an electorate that could not be defeated between the blacks and the Mexicans and the Catholics. So they had to eliminate him in another way.
Yeah, that's it's amazing when you look back at it. And then I know Lyndon Johnson and Hoover were good friends, and obviously Hoover wasn't a great guy because he he tried to blackmail Martin Luther King, with tapes of him being with other women and stuff like that. And the same thing, like, there's stories about Martin Luther King. Neither him or Kennedy were perfect, but you can't ignore their message, and you can't ignore, we're all humans, we're all capable of making mistakes, we're all imperfect. And I know that, in our society, we like to judge others, but we don't like to judge ourselves and look in the mirror. So we like to hold people to higher standards than we hold ourselves. But these people, you can't ignore the messages of Kennedy and the messages of Martin Luther King. And personally, I think that there had to be something to it. And so much that they scared people who wanted to control the government and wanted to control the public, that they felt like they had to take them out. So I think that anybody who thinks that they weren't great men, I think they were such great men that they scared the higher ups, and they had to take them out. So I think that alone is evidence enough.
Yes, I think so too.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Abraham. This is an amazing story. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to tell this amazing story to myself. I mean, I got a little emotional during the story too, just hearing you talk about it. It is an amazing story, and it's awesome that you're finally getting some attention, and people are paying attention to it. And I hope that you only get more attention, and I hope that people look back at your life as and look at you as a historical figure, the way you should be looked at. And I think that you've been through a lot, and you've been through a lot more than I could even understand, and you've seen a lot. So I think that your wisdom and your ability to kind of look at current events and historical events is something that we should hold on to and share with people.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate that.
Thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day, and good luck with the book, and good luck with all your future events and your projects.
Thank you, and I hope we'll have another conversation someday.
Yeah, I'd love to have you on again and talk some more. Obviously, like I said, you've been through a lot and you've seen a lot, so I love hearing opinions and perspectives from people like yourself who've been through a lot. I think that it's weird because I've talked about this a lot on the show, how a long time ago we used to look up to people that were older, because they're wise and they've been through life and they've figured things out and they have really good perspectives on things. And like my generation now, it's like we all look up to people who are young and just want to party, and things have changed. But to me, I still look up to people who like yourself, who've been through a lot and seen a lot. And I think that every year that we live our lives, we look back and we're like, wow, I thought I was really wise a couple years ago, and I realized I was an idiot. And so you realize, like, every year you're kind of progressing. So when you meet somebody who's had many years to look and reflect, I think you really can learn a lot from it. So it's a pleasure to have you on the show and talk. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you. I'll send you the link to the episode once it's up, and like I said, I'll do my best to also share your story because I think it's an amazing one. And anyone who wants an autographed copy of the book can contact me at a.bolden@sbcglobal.net. Awesome. And I'll send them my autographed book. That's awesome. Yeah, and it's $20 autograph. Yeah, which is not really inexpensive when you look at today's day when the prices of everything's going up. But so it's there's still something nice about physically owning a copy of a book too. I know a lot of people are getting into Kindles and ebooks and stuff like that, but just like albums and CDs and there's something about physically holding something in your hand and seeing the actual artwork and all that stuff that I think is still enjoyable. So but buy the book, people. If you're listening to this, buy the book. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Hey, thanks, Mr. Bolden, and keep in touch. All right. Thank you. Good day. Wow, what an amazing podcast. He's a amazing guy, and I wasn't kidding. I really did almost get emotional listening to his story. It was just to hear what he went through, and he saw real racism. I mean, he lived during a time where, like I said on the podcast, politicians were in the KKK. There were, I remember hearing stories about politicians taking pictures with, right next to, a hanging African American. I mean, just it was amazing, So to today, yeah, we've progressed, but I feel like there's still racism. They just found a more creative way of continuing it. So super interesting podcast. Look into his book. I believe Mark, last time I checked, I remember Mark Lane, a guy who is familiar, anybody who's researched the JFK assassination, he's written a book on it and researched it. I think he is doing a movie based on Abraham Bolden's story and his book. So look out for that, and I'll also look out for that. But thanks again, guys, for listening. I truly, truly appreciate it. I got some more shows coming up next week. Please share this podcast. I think one of the best ways to kind of get podcasts out there and get people to talk about it is sharing them. I was just listening to a Brian Callen show not too long ago, and this guy was talking about how, different way, talking about marketing. I actually forget what the topic was, but specifically, but he was talking about, in this part of the conversation, about how you get things and to pick up and become popular, and one of the best ways is word of mouth, is sharing it, because, and he used a really good example. I don't know if it was Brian Callen or the guest who used the example that if you tell somebody about a product because you don't have any investment in it, it's not your product, you're only telling them because it's good, they're more likely to try it or listen to it or watch it or whatever, if it's a movie, if it's a band or whatever. But if it, obviously corporations themselves, when they spend all that money on marketing, or you hear interviews with the band, every band says, hey, the next album's our best album, I swear, it doesn't mean as much because they have incentive to try to sell you the product or get you to pay attention to the product. So, I think word of mouth is important. If you like any of my past episodes, share them, retweet them, comment on them, rate them on iTunes and Stitcher. I'd really appreciate anything you guys do, and I'll keep doing my best to bring you really interesting episodes. I've been super lucky to get people like Abraham Bolden. I mean, this guy, in my opinion, is a historical figure, and to have him on my show is amazing. To have somebody who is directly linked to the JFK assassination and has his own story linking himself to it, and just his own personal story with it. So it's just amazing. And remember, the Theory 6 music project is out. So check that out. The EP is called The Ripple Effect. All the music you hear on the podcast will be on there. So you can go check that out and, just support the podcast by buying some music, and you get music, and in return I get 60 cents or whatever the hell it is. But whatever it is, it helps. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see you next time. Peace.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. And ruthless conspiracy to send to the news, to stifle dissent, cover up our mistakes.
is Orion, IBM, ITT, and AT&T, and DuPont, Dow, and Exxon. Those are the nations. The world is a college of corporations. The world is a business.